Once upon a time, deep in the heart of Colombia, where the Andean mountains kiss the sky and the tropical jungles hold their mysteries, there was a young boy named Pablo, born into a modest family. The year was 1949, and the village of Rio Negro, where he came into the world, had yet to realize the magnitude of the force that had just been born. Little did anyone know that this boy would grow into a man who would control not only the fate of Colombia but also the most significant portion of the world's drug trade. This is the story of Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, the most feared, revered, and infamous drug lord in history. Pablo Escobar was the son of a farmer and a schoolteacher, two individuals who sought to give him a humble but honest upbringing. His father Abel toiled day and night on the family's small farm, while his mother Hermilda hoped to instill the values of education in her son. Yet even at a young age, it became evident that Pablo had no interest in following the typical paths laid out before him. From the very beginning, Pablo showed a thirst for power, wealth, and a desire to live beyond the modest means of his family. Legend has it that as a young boy, Pablo would often tell his friends, "I'm going to be the president of Colombia one day." But he didn't mean it in the sense of a political figurehead, no. What young Pablo craved was absolute control, a kingdom in which he could rule over all. In his adolescence, Escobar was already dabbling in petty crimes. The streets of Medellín, a city growing rapidly in both population and chaos, became his playground. He started small, stealing cars, selling counterfeit diplomas, and smuggling contraband goods across the border from Panama. It was during these formative years that Pablo learned the intricacies of criminal enterprise. But small-time crime was never enough to quench his thirst. He knew that if he wanted true power, he had to find something bigger, something more lucrative, something that could make him untouchable. In the 1970s, Colombia found itself at the crossroads of a new and dangerous industry: cocaine. Though the coca plant had been used for centuries by indigenous peoples for its mild stimulant properties, it wasn't until foreign chemists discovered how to refine the plant into a potent white powder that its true potential for both addiction and profit was realized. Pablo, always with his ear to the ground for new opportunities, saw the rise of cocaine as his golden ticket. He quickly realized that the U.S. market was ripe for exploitation. As the disco era exploded, so too did the demand for cocaine, with American users paying exorbitant prices for the drug. With a keen sense for business and ruthless ambition, Pablo recognized that if he could control the supply, he could make more money than anyone had ever dreamed possible. But the business of drugs wasn't just about growing coca plants. It was about transportation, security, distribution, and, most importantly, staying ahead of law enforcement. Pablo's first step was to establish connections with the coca growers in Peru and Bolivia, securing a steady supply of the raw product. He then built laboratories deep in the Colombian jungle, far away from prying eyes, where the raw coca could be processed into pure cocaine. Escobar was no chemist, but he understood the value of surrounding himself with those who had the technical know-how. He formed alliances with traffickers, pilots, and distributors, all while learning the intricacies of smuggling. At first, the cocaine was hidden in suitcases or concealed within products like coffee or bananas. But as demand soared, so did the scale of Escobar's operation. Soon, entire planes and even submarines were being used to transport his precious cargo north to the United States. Pablo was not alone in his pursuit of drug empire dominance. Other Colombians were also profiting from the cocaine trade, but none quite as efficiently or ruthlessly as Escobar. He quickly realized that the key to surviving in such a dangerous business was unity. In 1976, he formed what would become the infamous Medellín Cartel alongside several other traffickers, including the Ochoa brothers and José Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha, known as El Mexicano. Together, the Medellín Cartel would come to control nearly 80% of the cocaine smuggled into the United States. Pablo, however, was its unquestionable leader. His ruthless efficiency, combined with an uncanny ability to buy loyalty through fear or money, made him the dominant figure in the cartel. But while Escobar was brilliant at managing his criminal empire, he knew that his greatest threat would always be the law. And so, in typical Escobar fashion, he came up with a solution that would be as infamous as the man himself: plata o plomo, silver or lead. It was a simple proposition. Anyone who stood in his way, whether they were police officers, judges, or politicians, had two choices. They could either accept a bribe, plata, or face the bullet, plomo. This philosophy of bribery and violence quickly became the foundation of Escobar's power. Those who cooperated with him were generously rewarded, while those who opposed him found themselves dead. Over the next decade, the Medellín Cartel grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire with Pablo at its head. He became known as El Patrón, the boss, a man whose power rivaled that of any president. In fact, at the height of his wealth, Pablo's cartel was making an estimated $420 million a week. Escobar had become one of the richest men in the world, with his wealth rivaling that of legitimate global corporations. Despite his ruthlessness, there was another side to Pablo Escobar that would help cement his legendary status, not just in Colombia but worldwide. To many of the poor people in Medellín, Pablo was more than just a drug lord. He was a hero, a modern-day Robin Hood. Escobar used a portion of his immense wealth to build housing, schools and hospitals in the poorest neighborhoods of Medellín, where the government had failed to provide even basic services. His generosity won him the loyalty of thousands. The slums of Medellín, particularly the area known as Barrio Escobar, became strongholds of support for the drug lord. He built soccer fields for the children, provided food and clothing for the needy, and even paid for weddings and funerals for those who couldn't afford them. For many, Pablo wasn't just a criminal, he was a savior. This calculated philanthropy was not without purpose. By winning the hearts of the poor, Escobar created a shield around himself. These people who benefited from his largesse would never cooperate with the police. They would tip off Escobar's men about any planned raids, and many even took up arms to protect him when the government finally came looking for him. Escobar's popularity grew to such an extent that he decided to pursue a more legitimate form of power. In 1982, he ran for and was elected to Colombia's Congress, serving as an alternate member of the Chamber of Representatives. It was a bold move for a man who had built his empire on crime, but Escobar believed that his political career could shield him from prosecution and give him the respectability he craved. However, it wasn't long before his dark past caught up with him. The Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, began a crusade against the drug trade, publicly exposing Escobar's criminal activities. Furious at being disrespected and knowing that his political ambitions were over, Pablo reverted to the only tactic he knew: violence. In 1984, Lara Bonilla was assassinated on Escobar's orders, marking the beginning of a bloody war between the government and the Medellín Cartel. Escobar's murder of the justice minister marked a turning point in his relationship with the Colombian government. No longer content to simply accept bribes or look the other way, the government now declared war on the drug lord and his cartel. President Belisario Betancourt, under increasing pressure from the United States, began cracking down on the drug trade, leading to a bloody and protracted conflict between Escobar's cartel and the authorities. In response, Escobar unleashed a wave of violence across Colombia that had never been seen before. Car bombings, assassinations and massacres became commonplace. Between 1989 and 1993, it's estimated that Escobar was responsible for the deaths of over 4,000 people, including judges, police officers, journalists and politicians. At the height of the conflict, Escobar even ordered the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing 110 people in an attempt to assassinate a presidential candidate. But even as the violence escalated, Escobar continued to present himself as a man of the people. He negotiated with the government, offering to turn himself in if he could be guaranteed that he wouldn't be extradited to the United States. Extradition was Escobar's greatest fear, as he knew that in the U.S., he would face a justice system he couldn't bribe or intimidate. He famously declared, "Better a grave in Colombia than a cell in the U.S." In 1991, after years of violence, the Colombian government struck a controversial deal with Escobar. In exchange for his surrender, he was allowed to build his own prison, La Catedral. It was a prison in name only. The luxurious compound featured a soccer field, a nightclub and even a waterfall. While inside, Escobar continued to run his empire, smuggling drugs and ordering hits from within his lavish prison walls. For a time, it seemed as though Escobar had found a way to maintain his power while avoiding the full wrath of the law. But his arrogance proved to be his downfall. When the government realized that Escobar was continuing his criminal activities from inside La Catedral, they attempted to transfer him to a real prison. Escobar, ever the master of escape, simply walked out of La Catedral, disappearing into the mountains and beginning a new phase of his war with the state. The Colombian government, now with full support from the United States, formed a special task force known as Search Block, whose sole mission was to capture or kill Escobar. The DEA, CIA, and U.S. Special Forces provided training and intelligence to the Colombian police, while rival drug cartels and paramilitary groups formed alliances to hunt Escobar down. Over the next year and a half, Escobar was on the run, constantly moving between safe houses, his once vast empire crumbling around him. As his former allies turned against him and his enemies grew bolder, the walls began to close in on the once untouchable kingpin. On December 2, 1993, after months of pursuit, the search block finally located Escobar in a middle-class neighborhood in Medellín. After a brief shootout, Escobar was shot and killed on the roof of one of his hideouts. His death marked the end of the Medellín Cartel, but it also cemented Escobar's status as a legend, both in Colombia and around the world. Pablo Escobar's death brought a temporary end to the chaos that had consumed Colombia for over a decade. But his legacy would live on, both in the drug trade and in the folklore of his country. To some, Escobar was a ruthless criminal who brought death and destruction to thousands. To others, he was a folk hero who defied the system and provided for the poor when no one else would. Even today, the name Pablo Escobar evokes a mixture of fear, fascination, and awe. His rise to power, fueled by violence, corruption, and an insatiable lust for control, is a story that continues to captivate the world. And though the man himself is long gone, the shadow of his empire still lingers, a reminder of the dangerous allure of power and the destructive forces of greed. This then is the story of Pablo Escobar, the boy from Rio Negro who became the most feared drug lord in history, the man who ruled an empire of cocaine and whose rise to power shocked the world.